Okay. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening for our conversation with artist Dorothy Alig and a tour of her exhibit, Postcards from My Backyard. I'd encourage all of you to visit the gallery to see Dorothy's work in person. The gallery continues to be open during regular business hours, Tuesday through Saturday, 11 through 5. We're wearing masks, even though we're not right now, and maintaining social distance, and we limit the number of visitors to the gallery, so it's a very safe shopping experience. You know, it's a great time to buy art. We are all going to be cooped up in our houses for a very long coronavirus winter, and it's the perfect time to make our homes beautiful. So come on in and buy art. So let's get started. For those of you who haven't met Dorothy before, let me introduce her. She lives and works in Indianapolis and northern Michigan, and is both a painter and a printmaker. She was also a textile conservator at the Indiana Museum of Art for many years before deciding to focus on her own art instead of preserving other people's art. So welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you. Thanks, Cynthia.
To get us started, why don't we have you read your artist statement for the exhibit while we do a quick little video tour of the exhibit? Oops, I'm trying to mute that. There we go.
Okay.
Okay, Dorothy.
Well, this show is called Postcards from My Backyard because I thought of these paintings as postcards to communicate with family and friends about what I was seeing and thinking about during this period when no one could visit in person. The landscape has always been an inspiration for my paintings, but this year during this emotionally and particularly stressful time, the landscape became more than that. It was my emotional anchor. The sunrise, the hills, the Great Lake, surrounded by polycentenarian trees, these are the lasting things, and all else shall pass. I spent several months this summer in a small town on the shore of Lake Michigan where the natural world was front and center. During long walks along the shoreline and through the nearby orchards, I photographed and made sketches of the landscape. I also collected an array of plant materials, leaves, bark, berries, and seeds, and made them into over 30 different inks. I've used some of these botanical inks in my most recent paintings as a way to quite literally bring a little of the natural world into the work. And I feel really fortunate that, unlike some of my friends who are actors or dancers, during this period of social distancing, as a visual artist, I have a huge advantage in that I can spend the time to deepen my interaction with nature and research things related to the inks and the botanical aspects, and then retreat to my studio and use those as inspiration for my art.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So now I am going to put on a slideshow that will have pictures of all the different pieces in the exhibit so we can see them a little more closely, plus some other information that will provide insights that Dorothy's going to give us into her work. So let me add that if any of you have questions as we go along, I'd ask you to hold them until the end or just write them in on the chat function down at the bottom of your screen. And Dorothy will answer all your questions at the end.
All right. Well, I thought I would begin by just showing a little bit about my studio and some of the inspiration for the work, for this body of work in particular. And this is my studio in Indianapolis. It's where I mostly paint, but also I have a etching press, and I use a lot of screen printing in my work, and of course drawing. So just let's see, the next slide gives you, shows you about maybe a quarter of my screens. Probably have a lot, what I call a library of 80 or 90 screens that I've made based on my own drawings. And I use these to apply pattern elements on top of the painted surface. So I'll show some examples of that.
Uh-oh. Dorothy, you're
I
frozen.
wish you were here. The background and some of the kind of flat ribbon-like pens are painted, but then like the area in the lower right side, those are printed. And let's
Dorothy,
one, Cynthia.
your voice is going in and out for some reason, so you may have to repeat this a little bit.
Okay, well, let's go. The next one shows some of the same things. So let's move to the next one. The weather is fine here. This is also a combination of painted, mostly the background is painted and then pattern elements are applied, but it's a mix of the two throughout. Lots of layers.
So when I was looking at your work, I was recognizing, say, this motif I have seen before. This one is also one of your screens, correct?
Yes.
So sometimes it's a little hard to tell what's a screen and what's hand painted for me. So it's always interesting just to get your perspective so I understand better. So for instance, is this piece here, is that a screen?
Uh-oh, now I've lost you a bit.
Okay, right above the pink, right above the pink area.
That's a pattern that came from a series I did about ancient geology and sort of a fan coral type pattern.
Ah.
But the nice thing is once I've made the screen, I can use it, for quite a while before the screen eventually wears out. But I don't really use the screen in a traditional way where you're printing the whole screen and making multiple copies of the same thing. I just use it to apply a lot of pattern kind of efficiently. So I might only use like a little corner of the screen. I might only use 1/10 of one screen that I've made just to put a little bit of pattern somewhere. So it's really just like as I said, a vocabulary of patterns that I can pull from.
I don't know whether this is the right place to ask this question, but one of the things that we talk about is that your work is done on paper. It's acrylic on paper that you then mount to panel. And I was curious as to why you work on paper as opposed to canvas.
Well, for some reason, maybe my printmaking background, I like working flat on a table. So for one thing, paper is very easy to move around. And I use this beautiful paper. It's a Japanese paper that has a really nice, beautiful sheen to it. It's handmade. And there's just something really nice about the surface of this particular paper that I like working with. Of course, I end up covering most of it with paint, so it doesn't really always show through, but it's just a material that I particularly like working with.
It speaks to you for some reason,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also nice because I can, as I'm painting, I can crop it as I go. Whereas if you start with a canvas or a, solid panel, you're locked into that shape, for the duration. So it gives me a little more flexibility in that regard too.
So we'll move on now to this next slide.
Yes, I included a few photographs that I've taken of the landscape that I think kind of give a sense of my aesthetic sensibility. I don't actually paint from photographs or like try to, replicate a photographic image in a painting, but I think there's certain aspects of these photographs that, I think you might recognize in my painting. So this one is a photograph of the White River in Indianapolis I took many, many years ago. And then this painting, the Field and Stream, is, totally different, of course, but the same elements are there, with the trees and the vegetation leading through sort of an opening that shows the water and the area behind.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, it's not based on that photograph I showed, but I feel like there's certain elements, and I think any artist would feel this way, that your aesthetics that you apply or the things that attract you to take a photograph are also the things that probably interest you as you're making your artwork. So making your paintings or prints.
So I have another question for you, which is that typically in your exhibits, you have sort of a central theme that you research extensively. So one year it was Islamic architecture, and another year it was archaeological sites in the US. So this year was a strange year, obviously, but how did you put the exhibit together this year, theme-wise?
Well, actually, and I don't think you and I have really talked about this, but ironically, and this is a great example of this. I started off about a year ago thinking about landscape and thinking about how they're changing due to invasive species, especially in Michigan, and like emerald ash borer and spotted lanternfly, and you know, these different creatures that were in many cases causing a great deal of destruction. And if you actually look at this tree in this painting, you can see little kind of emerald green
Mm-hmm.
shapes going up the trunk, and that was an emerald ash borer.
Ash borers, oh my.
But then when COVID-19 appeared and viruses, you know, which is sort of an invasive species if you think about it,
Yeah.
it just started to feel like that might not be the best subject to be exploring right now. I mean, it was, you know, obviously alarming to me personally, as it is to everyone. And I just thought, well, you know, maybe I'm going to put that idea on hold for the most part. But there were a few paintings that I'd already started that incorporated that concept. And I just decided at that point,
The same.
well, I just decided at that point just to kind of pursue something more some comforting and maybe imagine it based on the imagination a little bit more than the harsh reality of viruses and invasive species.
Got it. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we should move along
Yeah,
here.
the next, yeah.
Okay. Dorothy, you froze again.
Kind of example of how my photographs and interests translate into paintings. This is, uh-oh. Are we there still there?
Yeah, you are. You're going in and out, but you're there.
Okay. So this is a photograph of a garden. It's actually my mother-in-law's garden in the winter, and she was really an artist and incorporated a lot of texture and color. I mean, even for, you know, a kind of what some people would have considered an off-season time. And I think there's another photograph of this same spot. Yeah, here's another idea of her design, and I was very inspired by that. But I took these photographs probably 15 years ago and wasn't really looking at them when I was making this current work. But as I look back on it, I feel like there's a what am I trying to say? Well,
Connection.
a connection, a sort of sympathetic aesthetic here. So let's see the next painting. I hope this finds you well. Sort of has the same sort of density and variety of textures and colors and all that. I think that's what drew me to those photographs.
Yeah.
Now this painting and a couple of the others in the show are collages, actually. They're not, I mean, they're all paper elements that I've made, but both these two works incorporate some even digital imagery that I printed onto a super fine Japanese paper and then collaged it onto the other paper. In this case, the sort of brown, Cynthia, do you know the brown dots that are the digital?
Right up here, right?
Those are actually like the hydrangea heads from a photograph.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just incorporated those in, but then the dots on the lower right side are screen printed. So, you know, I'm kind of playing around with different ways of creating the patterns in the images.
Did we have one more? I think we had one more piece in that series. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and another aspect of these three paintings is I was using patterns and papers that I already had in the studio, and part of that was because they came towards the beginning of the COVID period when it wasn't really that easy just to order new supplies or go out looking for art supplies. So I took a look around the studio. Of course, I have plenty of materials to work from that I've collected over the years. So I started playing around with some of those. And the kind of blue watery pattern that you see at the bottom of this piece. Yeah, that was based on an aqua tent that I'd made years ago. And I don't know, for some reason was drawn to do it again and decided to play around with that and incorporate a lot of new elements on top of it. So this is the result.
Okay, let's move on to the next photograph.
Yeah, so I thought I would include just a couple of images of the landscape up in northern Michigan on the Leelanau Peninsula, where we spend as much of the summer as we can. I just think the landscape up here is so beautiful. I mean, the rolling hills and the lake. And so I'm just throwing these in to kind of give a sense of some of the things that really inspire me. Um, let's see the next one.
One more, go another.
Yeah, let's go one more.
Okay.
Now this one is just, it's not a really particularly arresting photograph, but this is a lot of what I see when I'm up there, which is, sort of interesting forms in the foreground and then a lighter area that recedes, quite a ways. And so the next painting, okay, well, this requires a little explanation. I'm going to show a series of stages of this painting's development, and this is the very first one. Now, actually, Cynthia, if you could go back a few slides, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Next one, that. No, one more, up
Okay.
forward. No, sorry, other way.
This
There.
one? Okay.
That, yes. Okay, I'd forgotten about this connection, but this is a smaller work I did, and I like something about the composition here. So if you look at it in the upper right, there are those two sort of darker areas, and then there's a large dark area below that on the right-hand side, and then on the left, there's sort of a lighter opening.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Cynthia, if you now can go back to the last slide we were looking at, the one that's the first stage of the series. That one. You see the same basic composition.
Yeah.
So I'd forgotten, but I wanted to see what would happen if I played around with that basic composition on a larger scale. This is a much larger painting. So this is the first stage, and there's a lot of hand used inks to create those stripes in the background. Then I started laying down paint, and then a little bit of silk screening on the upper left corner. And then let's see the next one. Here I'm, adding more pattern elements and hand painted elements, but the same dark forms are still present. And yeah, I'm ready for the next.
Okay.
You can see I've added still more. I mean, the whole process of working on one of these probably takes at least a couple of weeks. I just because I've already probably got 20 or 25 layers on this piece, and I'm still looking at it and trying to figure out what it still needs or wants. So
Wow, I never would have guessed there were that many layers. That's
oh
interesting.
yeah, quite a few. So okay, I think maybe the next one is the last one.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so this is the final image, and you can see some of those original shapes are still there, like clearing on the left hand side that's lighter, but otherwise just had fun playing with the patterns and but in the foreground you can kind of see there's a sense of a foreground in that painting, and then a lighter area that goes back, that recedes.
Yeah.
So again, it's not based on any photographs, but it just there are elements that attract me in both photography and in the paintings.
So this is a question I think artists hate to have, but I'm going to ask you anyway, which is,
No.
how do you know when to stop when you're layering all these patterns on?
Well, I read another artist's answer to that question, and it was a famous artist. I don't remember right now who it was. It might have been Philip Guston, but someone said a work is never finished, only abandoned. It sounds kind of harsh, but I really understand that, because once you've looked at it and worked on it and, just tried to resolve whatever it is that needs, for so long, you just sort of feel like, okay, I've done everything to this that I can or that I want to do. And that's when you just have to stop. I mean, it's hard to describe, but that's the best I can
So
do.
it's less eureka and more like, I'm done with you. Like,
Yeah, it's
you're,
not like you're tired of it. It's just that you realize that if you keep going, you're probably gonna like it less. You're probably gonna
Mhm,
mess it up. So you just
mhm.
say, okay, I'm gonna stop.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. Let's see
Well,
what's next here.
yeah.
Oh,
Okay, so this is my studio in Michigan, and it's like just a little shed basically. And it's very close to the water, and the water levels on Lake Michigan are rising dramatically. And so it may not even be there next summer, but for the moment, it's wonderful because it's, just a few feet from the lake, as you can see. And the next slide, I think, oh yeah, so this is sort of a typical view from, from the shoreline.
mhm.
Um, this is Grand Traverse Bay. And I mean, this is not, especially stunning view, but I mean, it's always stunning. I love looking at the colors of the lake and the sky and how they interrelate. But, and like my husband thinks it's crazy because a lot of times we'll be looking at the water and I'll say, oh, look how orange the water is right now, or look at that yellow. And he's kind of just going, what are you talking about? He doesn't see it the same way that I do, but that's part of the real pleasure of being a visual artist is you're constantly like trying to look a little bit more closely and a little deeper to really see what's there.
Yeah.
And I see all probably, the one color I see probably the least of in that image is blue, which
Yeah.
probably seems really strange, but it's true. Um, let's see, let's go to the next image. So one of the things that I decided to pursue this summer as sort of a special research project is I was studying botanical inks. So inks made from plant material. And, the area of northern Michigan was perfect for this because there's so much, interesting plant material. I mean, everything from, lots of willow trees and pokeberry and wild grapevines and cherries and trying to think of others that are specific to that area. I mean, they're just, well, anyway, I came up with like 30, actually now I think I'm up to 37 different inks that I made from just what was nearby. And so I just think they're beautiful. I mean, they're subtle and they're, um, kind of in a yellow, brown, green range for the most part, but there are a few surprises.
Yeah.
So, but as Cynthia said, I was an art conservator for many years, so I know that a lot of these colors are not very stable to light. So I'm in a little bit of a quandary because I don't really want to use them in my art if they're going to change color over time, or if whoever has the artwork has to keep it in a dark closet. So I decided to use them just for under drawings. So let's see if we could see the next. So I did a small series of studies of the lake, and this is a wild grapevine ink that I used as the underdrawing. So I like the fact that it's there, that it's part of the environment and that I'm working in, but I'm not relying on it, to provide the color over a long period of time. So the next slide shows, so this is one of the paintings I did based on the lake and my observations of that body of water at different times of day and under different weather conditions.
And then there's a few more of them, which I never did get bigger pictures of. But these paintings are so beautiful. They're such a departure for you. There's no screens. There's no dots. It's very different. So I was just curious about your frame of mind as you were doing these.
Well, I'd say there are two factors that can't come into play. One is because I was working in that little shed, I actually don't have running water there. So I wasn't doing a lot of screen printing just because, the setup wasn't really suitable. But I think even more important, I just found these works like very soothing for me to make. I mean, they were fun, they were color studies, but they related to what I was seeing out the window. So I just, they were just sort of that's why I call them meditation, a lake meditation, because they just felt like the therapy that I needed,
Mhm.
and during such a strange time. So,
That we all need. Yes. Okay. So tell us about this painting.
this one is probably the outlier, actually. This is a, a park on the Leelanau Peninsula called Clay Cliffs. And this is actually a view of the lake from up high on a bluff looking down. And I took some photographs of this view and I just thought it was so weird and interesting. And the color palette is not my usual palette, but that is pretty close actually to the colors that I saw. That turquoise and the blue, and then the rocks almost looked purple, which I
Hmm.
thought was kind of an interesting juxtaposition. So I just wanted to, pay tribute to that view and see what would happen. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's very cool. I love the little spaces in the lake there.
Yeah.
Such an interesting pattern on their own.
Well,
It's,
it's one of those things where it looks like it wouldn't actually look like that, but it actually did look like
yeah.
that. But so, it's like, people say uh, if you wrote that in a not, a story, people
Mhm.
wouldn't believe it. It's so weird that you wouldn't believe it. Well,
Yeah.
that's kind of the way I felt about the lake in this image.
Okay, and I think we have one more.
Okay, at this point, I'm back in Indianapolis this fall, and I don't know, I started thinking about this view I had of the White River my old house that where I used to live, and it's fall, so fall colors were starting to dominate, and so I don't know, for some reason, this is just sort of what came out of me at this point in time. So.
So I was so intrigued by that little blue rectangle in the upper left-hand corner there that looks like a door to me. So it's kind of like almost like a surreal element in this painting.
I like that element too, Cynthia. And it's funny because sometimes you put things in when you're maybe getting just started laying out the composition and you think, oh, well, I'm going to probably go back and, do something
Yeah,
with that because it doesn't really make sense. But
yeah,
sometimes that's exactly what you do. But other times you think, well, I don't know, it's weird, but I just sort of like it and I'm just going to leave it. So that's the case with that, some of those
yeah,
elements. Can't really justify them, but I like them. So
yeah. Well, that is the end of our slides. Thank you so much for all that information, Dorothy. It's really interesting and also really helpful in looking at all these paintings. I have so much more insight into them after listening to your stories here.
oh, good.
So I'm going to unmute everyone who's joining us. At least I'm going to try to, and ask for questions. But first, I asked a lot of questions along the way, so I may have preempted everybody.
Well, I would like to request that you go back to, I think it was called, I Hope This Finds You Well.
Go back to that slide. Okay.
Yeah. Because I would just like to gaze upon it again.
Oh, there it
Oh,
is.
there
we
it
go.
is. I just love the colors in that, Dorothy.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love color is just such a fun thing. I love color.
I can tell. It's also my favorite thing about your work.
Oh,
But I love those greens and the greens and the blue greens.
We were talking about the fact that these are much more grayed out colors than Dorothy usually uses, but then we started talking about Dorothy's usual colors and realized that there was really no such thing. So
well, one thing that's kind of funny that I realized early on when I was working with color, when I first started doing my own paintings, is you know, since I worked at the museum, I worked with historic textiles for many years, and they're almost always kind of grayed out colors. You know, you don't think of fabrics or historic fabrics being like super bright because they're usually natural dyes and all. So when I would first start mixing paint, I'd find I would always gray the color down. I didn't like, and I still don't really love like bright primary colors. That's just not that interesting to me. I like the subtleties of, you know, of mixing lots of different colors and kind of graying them down a bit. So this is a good example of that, I think. It's not really bright, but it has a lot of colors in it.
It does. Other questions?
Which ones are done with collage?
Well, this is one of them. And yeah, we didn't really know, actually, let's go back to that one, Cynthia, because the other, yeah, that one. As I was saying, I sometimes incorporate like even digital imagery. And this one, if you look in the upper right corner, sort of some tree shapes, tree branch like forms, those are actually a digital, print that I did on my printer on a very fine Japanese Gampi paper, and then added that into on top of the, support layer of paper. And there are a lot of, if you look at it closely, you can actually see where the paper is layered. There's the papers are very thin, but they're thick enough that you can actually see that there's some three-dimensionality to them. So this one is, this one's collage, and then the next two, I think, are collage.
Let's see. This one.
Yes.
And this one.
Mhm.
Yeah, because this is the one that has the aqua tint paper on the bottom here, the blue.
Uh-huh. Yes.
When you work with collage, what do you call them, paintings or what, or mixed media?
I generally just, mixed media is, I think, the best explanation, the best non-committal explanation, because, it would take a whole paragraph to describe, aqua tint on Gampi, sheen collate onto, whatever. That's getting a little too wordy. So mixed media seems to.
Doesn't fit on the price cards for sure. Yeah. Anybody else?
What is the name of the paper that you use in Japan?
The main, the support layer of paper.
Right, from Japan, right.
Okay, well, it's called a Gampi it's Gampi faced paper. It's GAMPI, which is a type of plant that's used in a lot of Japanese papers.
Mhm.
And it's for its thickness, it's very strong, and it's just got a beautiful sheen. So, but then it's so fine that for my purposes, it needs a thicker layer underneath it. So when they make that particular paper, there's a heavy paper and then this very fine, it's almost like silk, Gampi that's incorporated into the paper at the same time. So they're not separate layers, but one face is very silky and smooth and the other is more of a structural component.
Sometime I should get a sheet of that from you so that I could show that to people. That would be interesting. I didn't think of that before. If you could mail that to me.
Sure.
Well, is there another paper that you use also, a heavier one?
That's actually pretty heavy. By the time it has that second layer on it, it makes it heavy enough that, I can pick it up and put it on the wall and carry it around. And, it's not like super fragile at that point. I think that's what I like about it. It's got the really delicate surface layer, but then it's got, a strong enough backing that you can handle it without damaging it.
What do you use for an adhesive?
Well, I use a lot of golden products. When I worked at the art museum, we did a research project with golden paint materials, and I had to do with UV protection of varnishes. But I was so impressed with Golden's technical support. I don't know, well, they really pay a lot of attention to the quality of their products and what artists need and all that. So I use a lot of their products, and I think I use like a soft gel for the adhesive on these pieces.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you an artist?
Yes, yes, and I do a lot of collage with like a transparent paper
Uh-huh.
and paint.
Uh-huh. Well, that's very similar. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you use?
I use a gel medium, which is, a thin, yeah, layer.
Yeah, that's very similar, sounds like.
Okay, are there any other questions? All right, well then that is the end of our first Friday. Thank you, Dorothy, for such a wonderful talk, and thanks to the rest of you for joining us. We appreciate your time and your interest, and we hope to see you again next month.
Yeah. Thank
So-
you, Cynthia.
Thank you, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Dorothy,
Bye-bye.
very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you on already?
No, I can't see to turn it off. Stop recording.